Well, the men's Final Four is set to tip off tomorrow, and joining me to break it all down is Mike DeCourcy of The Sporting News. Mike, it's great to see you again. Thanks for taking a couple minutes.
Oh, happy to do it.
Last we spoke, we were kind of heading into the madness, and what ensued, I think, surprised even those who thought that the top seeds weren't necessarily the top seeds. What surprised you most over the course of the last couple of weeks?
Wow. I think that probably the fact that we've gotten to the Final Four with only one team out of all four that has the traditional components of a national champion. So either UConn wins this or we have someone win it that looks nothing like anybody that's won it before. And I'm not talking about names or anything like that. I'm talking about the components that usually are necessary to win 6 games in this tournament. And there are 3 in particular that stand out. The first thing is NBA talent, first round picks. No team since 1987 has won a national championship without a first round pick on its roster. That's a long time. I can tell you that because I was there in 87 when Steve Alford in Indiana managed to pull it off. They had an all-time great player, college player in Steve, and an all-time great college coach in Bob Knight. So they were able to do it, but every team since has needed that sort of player. The top 20 offense and defense component, greatness at both ends. Since Ken Pomeroy of KenPom.com started compiling his efficiency stats, every team but one over a full season has been top 20 offense and top 20 defense. Only UConn right now meets that standard among the 4 teams that still stand. And then the only other thing that goes into that is size. Since 1979, every single team that's won this championship has had size at center, size in the front court to protect the rim, to give them easy opportunities at easy baskets. UConn has that. Donovan Clingan coming off the bench to replace Adama Sanogo, who's a Big East, all Big East player. They have it. The team they'll play on Saturday, Miami, has a wonderful center in Norchad Omier, but he's only 6'7", all the way back to 79. And again, 79, Magic Johnson on your side, and all of a sudden Jay Vincent doesn't look so short. So those are the things that usually go into winning a championship, and only UConn meets every single category. So do they win it, or do we have one of those precedents or multiple precedents broken?
I'm so excited to talk to you. There's so much to unpack. I don't know where to start. I mean, I would argue that having these non-traditional, non-blue blood teams in the mix in a Final Four, for me, I think is a good thing for the sport because it's generated a ton of interest. I mean, the tournament as a whole being so explosive, I view it as a good thing. And some of the players, I was reading some quotes from some San Diego State guys who said, if you love college basketball, then this is good, to have these teams here. Do you agree? Is it good? Is it bad for the game? Is that even really a fair question to not have some of those traditional powerhouses there at the end?
I think that I don't really understand the component of this week that laments the possibility. I mean, we haven't even had the games yet, so we don't know what the ratings will be. But the projections that this will be the worst rated tournament or Final Four ever and all. Well, who does that really matter to? I mean, in the end, it doesn't even matter to Turner and CBS. It matters. I mean, they certainly want the best possible ratings because it helps them sell next year and all of that. But it really doesn't even impact them because the contract that they're working under runs for nearly another decade, not quite another 10 years. And with the way the television rights market is working right now, if that contract were magically to become available, it would be more valuable than even the $1 billion that they're scheduled to begin paying next year or the year after. Right now, I think it's around 700 plus million, and it will advance to close to or more than $1 billion. I think it's 24 or 25. So even at that figure, it's still worth more than that. So they're kind of getting a bargain based on what other rights have gone for and based on the audiences that traditionally and even this year have lined up to watch the NCAA tournament. So I think it's kind of like a scorekeeping kind of thing, just like the get-in price articles as well. You go on one of the secondary market sites and you look and it's relatively cheap to get in compared to a year ago. But again, who does that, like, it matters maybe to the people who are trying to profit off of reselling the tickets. But again, that doesn't impact the fan other than to make it less expensive to get in. And it doesn't impact the players on the floor who are going to pursue a championship regardless. It just seems to be the kind of thing that people talk about that doesn't really have that much impact on the sport or the game.
And to me, I think it's interesting to meet new coaches or to see a coach mature and develop and just get something different. I mean, you can love Mike Krzyzewski and watch him roam the sidelines for many, many decades, but sometimes it's fun to switch it up. You know, everyone's been talking about the lack of quote unquote blue bloods. How do you view UConn? I mean, the Big East and basketball are synonymous. Do you see them as a blue blood team?
You know, I think that you have to consider them to be a power. Danny Hurley, if they're able to win on Monday, that'll be the third coach to take them to a championship since 1999. You look over history. Okay, so at Carolina, it's Roy Williams, Dean Smith, and Coach Frank McGuire. That's three coaches. At Kansas, it's Larry Brown and Bill Self, and then going back into the 50s. So it's if you can do it under multiple coaches, multiple different coaches. Fog Allen, the third coach at Kansas. How dare I forget his name for a second? His name's on the building. But if you can do it under multiple different coaches, what more can they hold against you? They may not have the national following that some of the others have built up over time, but they have achieved nearly as much. By Monday night, they may have achieved in some ways equally as much as some of those other programs.
And you have that juxtaposed with a Miami team who they're going up against, who is a prime example of this sort of quote unquote new era of college basketball, name, image, likeness, transfer portal, all these things that have altered the landscape. How important are those two things alone? And are we seeing that sort of come to fruition now with some of these teams that may not have been here even a decade ago?
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that Miami likely would not be here had they not added Nigel Pack. And Nigel Pack's recruitment relative to name, image, and likeness was kind of a focus of last summer. The announcement of his name, image, and likeness deal, as I recall, predated the actual technical announcement of his commitment to Miami. So it was clearly a significant component of his decision-making. And he's been an important player in their championship run. So it does make a difference. It's not necessarily the revolution that I think that people think it to be, because it doesn't mean that only Miami is going to get here. I mean, we could be right back here next year with Duke and Kentucky and Kansas and whoever, because they also have the opportunity and have indeed been able to spend money on name, image, and likeness. Their boosters or their communities have been able to do that. So I don't think it necessarily changes who gets here, although it does help a team like Miami to have a chance to get here. What I think has been the biggest difference and kind of overlooked in why this year has been different has been the extra year of eligibility granted to various players as a result of being in school during the 2021 season that was impacted by the lingering pandemic. The fact that season was conducted, but in empty gyms for the most part, for the tournament to be a bubble, they were granted an extra year of eligibility so that they could have that same experience that they ordinarily would have, and they're getting it now. So I think that having players that are 23, 24, 25, and in some cases 26 years old, still playing college, really exacerbates the difference between those players, between the traditional veteran players and the freshmen who come in not having played college basketball, not knowing how hard you have to go to win a game, how hard you have to go and practice every day. All of that's new to a freshman, but to a 25-year-old fifth-year senior, they've been through it plenty.
Yeah, it's a great point. Florida Atlantic, some of their players have taken issue with the idea that they're a Cinderella, and have said as much in some of what I've been reading from these press availabilities, where they're like, we don't view ourselves that way because of the way that we play. Everyone by now, I think, is familiar with how efficient they are from three, and that'll be a really interesting matchup against San Diego State's defense. But do they have a point? I mean, with the way that this tournament was seeded, with some of the way that these teams have been able to knock off top seeds, nobody more than, Miami, I guess, a 1 seed, a 3 seed, a 4 seed. Is it true? I mean, should we not be viewing an FAU through the lens of a, quote, Cinderella run?
Well, I think it's an interesting component to how they are handling this. They are a mid-major program. That is inescapable. They play in one of the leagues that rates usually between 9 and about 15 by the various metrics that are used to judge these things. They do not have the 5-star player that traditionally the bigger programs, the bigger powers can have. So they have all the components of a mid-major program. But if they view themselves as having superseded that, I think that's defensible. I mean, they won 30 plus games in the regular season before they even got here. We've had some other teams that are here, Miami being one that got to 30 wins as a result of playing in the tournament and winning 4 games. But Florida Atlantic was already there when this ball first went up in the air back 2-3 weeks ago. So I think that they can make a case, and I think it's probably part of their approach to feeling like they belong here, feeling like they have a chance to win here, and that they're not just here to sort of take a tour of the facility, go through some practices, take their L on Saturday evening, and then go home. I think they feel like, hey, you know what, we could probably win this thing. They don't necessarily know what it's like to play in those last 2 games, but I think they can look at the field and say, maybe if we were coming here and this was a different year, like say 2015, and we had to play undefeated Kentucky and Duke with Jahlil Okafor and Wisconsin with Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker, maybe we wouldn't have any chance. But that's not who's here. We look like every other team here in many ways, so we can win this thing. Let's not treat it like we're tourists.
Who do you give the edge to in that matchup?
I think San Diego State, I was talking about that age thing before. What I like about this San Diego State team, beyond the obvious, the defense that they play, which is easily the best of the 4 teams in the Final Four, what I like best about this team is it doesn't seem to matter who's on the floor. Somebody is going to try to make winning plays. Whoever's off the floor is going to be fully engaged in the success of the guys who are playing at that moment. They play 9 players. They don't have anybody that averages 30 minutes. They don't have anybody that averages even 13 points. And they are so connected both on and off the floor. It's not like I think anything that I've seen in college basketball. And it always seems like there's a Darian Trammell to come off the bench, or excuse me, not to come off the bench, but to step forward and score the points that maybe Matt Bradley, who has struggled from the Sweet 16 on, their nominal star player, the guy who made all conference, hasn't been able to make a shot since he arrived in Louisville. But Trammell stepped up and was fabulous there and became the region's most outstanding player. It doesn't seem to matter to those players who the star is, who's on the floor. They're going to do their best to try to win. Every team that gets here is connected, but I think they've taken it to the next level. I think they have an edge over FAU as a result.
And we always talk about the pressure that some of these teams lacking experience will be feeling when they head into a Final Four environment. But now you've got a pair of coaches in that matchup who are likely somewhere they've never been and feeling a ton of pressure. I mean, will that ultimately be a factor? Because as we saw, I mean, even coming down to a late foul in that last game out, moments like that are critical and can be the difference here. Not necessarily the foul, but just coaching decisions in general at the end of these games if they are that tight. Is that something that you're going to be watching, and how do you view the coaching matchup?
Well, I think that you have an experienced coach in Brian Dutcher and less so with Dusty May. But again, neither is experienced at this. San Diego State, when they got to the Elite Eight, had never been to the Elite Eight before. FAU, when they began this tournament, had never won a game in this event. So I think that it's hard to say what will happen when the coaches match up against each other because, again, neither has been here before. Of the 4 coaches, Jim Larinaga is the only one who's been to a Final Four. Danny Hurley has not done that. And as I mentioned, the other 2. So I do think that it's probably going to come down to the players, and even the best coaches can make a decision that turns out wrong. It might be the right decision, but it turns out wrong, so it's graded as a mistake. The outcome doesn't always reflect the value of the choice, because sometimes you may call the exact right play at the exact right time and it just doesn't get executed, or the other team does a great job of defending it. It's impossible to say, but I do think that it'll come down to the players as much as anything on Monday night and on Saturday afternoon.
I know I've got you for just a couple more minutes, but just a few more for you. Just going back to the first matchup, UConn and Miami. I mean, you mentioned the job that Danny Hurley's done. I'm curious to hear what you think about the ways in which he's kind of grown and developed as a coach and stepped into this role, and who you ultimately think will win that game. I mean, you mentioned the talent that UConn has, the fact that they've got a little bit more of that sort of blue blood sort of fabric to them. How do you view the first game?
Well, I really respect how Dan has sort of looked inward to try to become a great coach. I think he's always been at least a good coach and has progressed through his career to very good. Starting at Wagner, he's done a good job from the minute he got there, and of course before that at St. Benedict's, developing terrific young players in high school, in the prep school area. He's been a very good coach as he's grown, but I think he started to understand that he was allowing his temper, if you want to call it that, with officials to really affect the outcome of games. And he looked inward and started to understand that if he was going to break through to the next level, if the Huskies were going to break through to the next level, he couldn't be an obstacle to that. He needed to facilitate those things happening. And so he's done much better with that over the last 6 to 8 weeks. That change has helped UConn recover the greatness of this team. Against Jim Larinaga, who's never had that problem. He's always been as cool as they come. He'll get a little angry every now and then, but he's a cool customer. He understands every now and then maybe you need to get into a ref with some anger, but for the most part, it's about making sure your players are composed on the floor and are always operating at a high level. Jim is a tremendous coach. He's done a great job with this team. For UConn, the number one thing that they have to do to win this game, and what Texas lost sight of as the game got tighter because Miami's offense heated up, and as the stakes got greater, they're 6-4, 3 minutes away from the Final Four, they forgot that you can score on Miami. It's harsh to say you can score at will, but they're the 105th rated defense in college basketball. It's not a great defense. You can score on them. You have to think about that every time down the floor. If you keep thinking about that, you're going to score, even as they're probably going to eventually wear down your defense. They spread you out, drive the ball, break you down, as well as any team in college basketball this year, and pretty much as well as any team in recent college basketball. But you can always score on Miami if you do the right things. It's just not. They're not tall. They don't protect the rim as well. They aren't they aren't positionally big around the perimeter. So UConn can't lose sight of that, and they have to find the best way to do that. Texas did for 30 minutes. They built a double-digit lead, and then they let that get away, and then they let the game pressure get to them. If UConn does that, Miami will not feel it. That's one thing I can say with great confidence. This Miami team doesn't feel game pressure in the way that many others do, and that's why they're here.
They do seem supremely confident in that regard. Just quickly, so are you right now at this moment predicting UConn and San Diego State potentially advancing with UConn winning it all?
That's what I have, absolutely. Again, I'll stick to those measures that I talked about before until they don't work. And then we're going to have to reevaluate everything at the start of next year's bracket if UConn's not handed the trophy on Monday night. Because I've always used those components as there are usually multiple teams deep in the tournament that are going to meet those qualifications, and then it's kind of the challenge of deciding which among them has that or will conquer the rest. This time there's only one that has all those components, and so if that team doesn't do it, we're going to have not just an unprecedented Final Four, but an unprecedented champion. And maybe that's a good thing for college basketball. Maybe it'll make me think harder in 2024. But that's the team I have winning on Monday against a really difficult San Diego State team. It wouldn't shock me at all based on everything that's gone over the last 3 weeks. It wouldn't shock me at all if I go 0-2.
Mike, last thing for you. This is kind of a departure, but with Brandon Miller, making his intentions known to sort of start the next phase of his career in the NBA, I know you've covered this Alabama story really closely. The fact that, this news has been announced that Alabama had an early departure from the tournament, what was the first thing that kind of ran through your mind, knowing just everything that he's been through and the way that the program handled everything with him being a cooperative witness in a heinous crime?
I think that a friend of mine talked to me yesterday through text and came up with the perfect summation of this. There was another school, a different school, smaller school within the last week that had a incident involving one of its players in the legal system. And my friend was in touch with the PR person at that school to write an article that was totally unrelated. And when that school's PR person finally got back to my friend, he said, "I'm sorry, I've been in a really long meeting about this circumstance." And my friend responded, "Whatever you do, do the opposite of what everything Alabama did on handling the Brandon Miller circumstance." I think that's what I take away from it, that Alabama damaged its reputation as a university athletic department and basketball program through how they handled the aftermath of the awful shooting and the death of the young woman. Good PR wouldn't fix what happened, but good PR practice would have mitigated the damage done to the reputations of those three elements that I talked about before. I think Alabama will always have this. And although Nick Saban has tried to say since that he wasn't expressing frustration about that circumstance when he said that there's no such thing as wrong place, wrong time, which was a direct contradiction to the basketball coach, Nate Oates, who tried to characterize Brandon Miller's circumstance as that. There's no doubt in my mind, no matter the denials that he's presented since, there's no doubt in my mind that Nick Saban was frustrated with having Alabama athletics reputation diminished by how that was handled. So that's, at this point, that's kind of the takeaway. There's nothing more important than the death of that young woman. No one's going to say that. But from an athletics component, you have to handle these things better. And the one thing I will always say is I don't know what the appropriate punishment is for Brandon Miller's presence on that night. I don't know exactly in basketball terms what it is, but I know it's not nothing.
Mike DeCourcy, thanks so much for your insight and for the prediction for what will hopefully be a pretty wild Saturday into Monday. The tournament's been that way. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.